It's the standard by which careers are measured. One of these 8 will claim a title today, but for all 8, simply being here on the Sunday stage is an immense, wondrous achievement. Can Donald Smith go the distance? Marcio Carvalho, your top seed. China's Liu Yuchen. Right the way down to Jan Ksandr, Martin Juza, Eduard Sajgalik, Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa, Lucas Esper-Bertu. Who will claim the title here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt? Hello everyone, welcome to Sunday. The showdown is in operation here in Dublin's Fair City. Rich Hagan alongside Brian David Marshall, the Pro Tour historian, and from R&D, the people who make the cards, Mr. Ian Duke. Gentlemen, not gonna lie, I thought yesterday was fantastic viewing.
Well, you had a great seat, the same seat everyone else at home did. We're happy you're feeling better. Welcome back, Rich. Yeah, yesterday was an amazing day, and you could really feel the tension ratcheting up every round as we went through the tournament, and you could see how much tension there was by that outburst of emotion from Lucas Bertho. Letting it all out, and the entire South American, Spanish, Portuguese Magic communities just coming together in song as he made the top 8.
Ian, you were in the booth down the stretch, watching just all the great Magic unfold. How hard is it for people to make rational, logical, correct Magic decisions under the heat of round 15 and 16?
Let me tell you something, Rich. There's a lot of pressure down there, and you could see just stoic faces and stalwart concentration. But even in the midst of that, we did have some mistakes made in those final rounds there, which almost led to a heartbreaking defeat there for Lucas Bertho. But he managed to rally and win things back and hit the best of 3 there. And just after seeing that, as BDM said, just the pouring out of emotion there, it's just tremendous.
And BDM, Gabriel Nassif once said to me, Magic is a game of mistakes, right? No one plays perfectly. You can't, if you play more than a few turns, you're going to make mistakes.
You're just trying to make the fewest.
Yeah, right. And I actually was really impressed by Bertu, the way he was able to come back from a literal game losing. I'm literally from 1-0 up, I'm actually 1-0 down, and yet recover.
You and I are both big fans of Makihito Mahara, famous for making an in-game mistake and then navigating his way out of it. That's what it takes. You are going to make mistakes. If you let those mistakes crush you, well, then you're never going to get to play at that next level, and that's true of every stage of the game.
All right, well, let's get to our bracket here on Sunday. Let's show you what's coming your way in an action-packed final day from Pro Tour Aether Revolt. We begin with our Stage 1 quarterfinals. That'll be Jan Ksandr against Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa. At the same time, Martin Juza and Eduard Sajgalik will be going at it. The 2 winners of those will advance to Stage 2, facing Donald Smith in the top half of the bracket and Liu Yuchen in the bottom half. And then our top 2 seeds enter the fray after lunch in the semi-finals. Marcio Carvalho and Lucas Esper-Bertu, you see there. And eventually, we'll have a champion somewhere around tea time tonight. So, why don't we get into our first quarterfinal? And here is Jan Ksandr, 24-year-old from the Czech Republic, closing in on $10,000 lifetime earnings. That's going to at least double here this weekend. 5-1 in draft, 7-2-1 in constructed. And what about his deck? Well, he is playing black-green Delirium. So, Ian, walk us through what this deck is and what it's trying to do.
So the core of this deck is something that we've seen a lot here over the weekend, but there are many different ways to take it. So, as I said, the core there is Winding Constrictor here, adding additional +1/+1 to your counters to your creatures whenever they get them, and that combines just absolutely superlatively with Walking Ballista and Rishkar Pima Renegade, 2 new cards that have shown themselves time and again over here this weekend. Beyond that, you have a lot of flexibility in the other slots. Some people are playing Tireless Trackers, others Grim Flayers, sometimes Sylvan Advocates, and you can see a little bit of diversity here in this list from Jan Ksandr, and I think that's been a real asset to him over the weekend, is that he's not sort of all in on one type of card or the other, one threat or one answer. He's got a diversity of things there, and I think that's been really good for him here this weekend.
Yeah, and this looks very similar in a lot of ways to the week 1 green-black deck that won a Star City Open that was had a little bit more of the Delirium than we've seen as we've moved forward from that first event.
Mind Rack Demon, a card that's been really, really impressive here. That 5th toughness there being really key to evade Grasp of Darkness, one of the removal spells that's been running around all weekend.
And to hold off a Heart of Kiran.
Absolutely true, yeah.
Yep, 5 is a pretty important number, it turns out, in the toughness department. Now, Jan Ksandr has drawn a bit of a tough opponent, it's fair to say. He's up against the number 8 seed. The 7 in brackets there indicates that he's currently ranked 7 in the world. A riot of colour on screen. It's Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa, one of the greatest players of all time. He's on Channel Fireball Ice. He is, of course, in the Hall of Fame. $1,000 for every day of the year and counting. 11 Pro Tour top 8s.
Yeah, Rich, he passes Kai Buda for total number of top 8s. Wow. He goes into second place.
All time,
yeah, absolutely. So young still so much on the top of his game. He could chase down John. I mean, obviously John has a lot to say about that. He's still playing, but Paulo's just such a steady clip.
Yeah, absolutely amazing stuff to see him back in the top 8. Why don't we look at his deck? It's a deck called Mardu Vehicles. If you're not used to Mardu Vehicles, we promise you will be by the end of the day. BDM, what's Mardu Vehicles?
Well, you know what? This is really about Heart of Kirin and, to a smaller degree, Cultivator's Caravan. It's just about using the dwarf crew synergies with Dapala and Veteran Motorist, and really just coming down very early, having a very, very aggressive deck. You've got the Toolcraft Exemplars, you've got the Thraben Inspectors, and that Scrap Heat Scrounger, really one of the breakout cards of the tournament to me. And you're just really putting your opponent under a lot of pressure. And this deck really rose up to oppress the Saheeli Rai combo decks, the copycat deck, and it oppressed it all the way back into the recesses at day 1.
So, Jan Ksandr against Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa is match 1. Here's the bracket one more time to show you what's also going to be running down on the feature match area behind me this morning. This is Martin Juza against Eduard Sajgalik. So why don't we take a look at Martin Juza, who is back for his 3rd Pro Tour top 8. Yeah, with the grin. He was so proud to make the top 8. He is rededicating himself to the game, trying to get himself a Hall of Fame resume, which this top 8 certainly helps. 4 Grand Prix titles, a 3-time national champion as well. Let's take a look at his deck, this is Jund Energy Aggro. BDM, this is a kind of his own unique concoction, really.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I had a conversation with Martin at the Hall of Fame dinner at the start of this season, and he was struck by it. He felt like, wow, I feel like I should have gotten here already, and he wasn't saying like someone had taken something from him. He felt like he hadn't lived up to what he knows he's capable of, and he said part of that was not playing the deck he wanted to play at a tournament. He became so locked into, okay, this is what the team's going to do, I'm going to do this. But he's like, the times that I've had success, the times that I've made the top 8 of a Pro Tour, it's been playing a deck I felt good with, that I knew, synchronized with my play style, worked for me. And so he came into this tournament, the team had a deck, he's like, you know what, guys, I think this is the deck that I'm going to play. And no one else played it on his team, and he felt really good about it, and sometimes that comfort level is really important.
Yeah, it's really an outstanding deck list, reminiscent of the red-green energy decks that we saw from last season, but adding black for a lot of disruption there, unlicensed disintegration, sideboard fatal pushes, and new card from Aether Revolt, Green Belt Rampager.
A card Martin has been making look amazing all weekend.
It's just a really unique and flexible card. Green for a 3/4, enters the battlefield, either gives you an energy or eats 2 and stays. There's so many little tricks you can do with it. Hopefully we'll see some of those here in the top 8.
Okay, so his opponent is Eduardo Sajgalik. Let's take a look at his profile. He is back for his 2nd Pro Tour top 8 appearance, 5-1 in booster draft, 7-2-1 in standard. Now, Silver Pro means he was qualified for 1 Pro Tour of his choice this season. Well, I think he's taken care of that by making the top 8 here. 148 lifetime pro points, well traveled around the world, and part of MTG Mint Card, one of the really strong teams here. What's his deck? Well, he is on Mardu Vehicles. Let's take a look at the list and get a few words from Ian on this one.
So we already talked a little bit about Mardu vehicles. Again, it's this base red-white aggressive deck, leveraging the power of Heart of Kiran, as BDM said, the really big breakout card from Aether Revolt here for this archetype. I'll also highlight a couple differences here with Eduardo's deck as compared to Paulo, Vitor, Damo, and Rosa's deck that we saw earlier. The big standout for me is 4 copies of Fatal Push in the main deck. Not all the Mardu vehicles are packing this here, but it's really, really well positioned for a field where you're expecting lots of black-green and lots of mirror matches. Adept at taking down opposing Hearts of Kiran, at taking down Winding Constrictors, taking down Walking Ballistas, no matter how big they might be. Just a really flexible and powerful card.
And perhaps, unfortunately for Martin Juza, taking down Greenbelt Rampagers.
Absolutely. Voltaic Brawler, a lot of the different creatures in Martin's deck.
Well, it is time to brawl. We have Jan Ksandr against Paulo, Vitor, Damo, and Rosa, Martin Juza against Eduardo Sajgalik. Let's start the quarterfinals here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt.
Hello there, welcome to the booth here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt. That's Luis Scott Vargas. I am Marshall Sutcliffe, and it is our pleasure to bring you quarterfinal stage 1 action here. We've got 4 players sitting in our feature match here. We're going to be starting off with Jan Ksandr from the Czech Republic. It's his first Pro Tour top 8, and this is only his 3rd Pro Tour. Jan does not have an extensive Pro Tour career. His opponent, on the other hand, an absolute legend of the game, Paulo, Vitor, Damo, and Rosa, now moves firmly into 2nd place all time for Pro Tour top 8s with 11 behind only John Finkel. He's from Team Channel Fireball Ice. Luis, we've got Mardu Vehicles versus Black-Green Delirium in the feature match area. Let's head down right now for quarterfinals, stage 1. Hello and welcome to coverage of Pro Tour Aether Revolt. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Luis Scott Vargas, and it is that time. It's Sunday. We're in quarterfinal stage 1. Our first match here is Paulo, Vitor, Damo, and Rosa. You see him from Brazil. He plays for Team Channel Fireball Ice, which is kind of their premium team. Really a lot of Hall of Famers and great players on that team. On the other side of the table, we've got Jan Ksandr from the Czech Republic in just his 3rd Pro Tour, and he finds himself in the top 8 sitting against one of the absolute legends of the game, 11 Pro Tour top 8s for Paulo. Now, Luis, by way of predictions here, what are we looking at? We got Black-Green Delirium in the hands of Jan, and Paulo has Mardu Vehicles.
So traditionally, coming to the Pro Tour, people who were playing the Black-Green deck thought they were a little favored against vehicles. That is part of the reason to play the Winding Constrictor deck. Paulo thinks that this matchup, the way the deck lists are configured, it's actually not as good as normal. He thinks normally the matchup favors the Black-Green deck, but this one he thinks is about 50-50, just based on the contents of each deck.
Looks like we've got a slight delay here from Jan. He's talking to our tournament director, Scott Larrabee.
I assume over the music selection on the headphones there.
Jan would prefer electronic dance music, but they decided on country. Now, they actually pump in a little bit of white noise into those headphones, and those headphones are there because we actually have a viewing area here in the hall where spectators can view, and we like to put the audio from, well, you and I, Luis, into that area there, and we don't want the players to hear it. Tournament integrity, of course, is the #1 priority for us here on coverage. All right, looks like we are underway with Jan Ksandr starting things off with a Grim Flare. 2 good 2-drops from each of our players here. No 1-drop from Paulo, Vitor, Damo, and Rosa, but he's got a Heart of Kiran here on turn 2.
And Paulo does have a shock in hand, and because he drew Spiral Bluff Canal on turn 2, if he had been able to lead with Spiral Bluff Canal, shock Grim Flare end of turn, and then play Heart of Kiran, this game would look very, very good for him. But as is, if Jan can hit Delirium thanks to the Evolving Wilds in hand, the Grim Flare trigger, and possibly just playing Walking Ballista and having it in play because it can shoot as an artifact and a creature if it hits the graveyard, then Shock may not be able to take out that Grim Flare, which could put Paulo in a difficult spot. So what Grim Flare hits with its trigger here is going to be critical to how the rest of this game plays out.
Gun's got a land in the yard right now.
Paulo could have opted to shock the Grim Flare instead of playing Heart of Kiran, but because his hand has multiple 2-drops and he does have a third land, he really wants to go 2-drop on turn 2, turn 3, play a land, play a 2-drop, and play the shock. You just hope there's a good target for it once the Grimflayer hits.
All right, so this is an important interaction here. The Grimflayer is now going to hit Paulo. That's going to let Jan look at the top 3 cards of his library. And he can do either put these in the graveyard or back on top in any order. The interesting thing here is that if he can somehow get Delirium just from these 3 cards alone, then the Grimflayer will get that bonus, become a 4/4. And it doesn't look like he got there quite. There's a Hissing Quagmire in that pile, and he already has a land as one of his 4 Delirium enablers. So he is going to have to settle for a 2/2 Grimflayer to start. And it looks like he's decided to keep a Grasp of Darkness on top of his library. That makes good sense when you're facing down a Heart of Kiran.
The good thing for Jan, though, is because he does have that Walking Ballista, if he plays it as a 1/1 here, it protects Grimflayer from shock next turn. He could opt not to play the Walking Ballista in order to play it for 2 next turn, but this is the top 8. Players do have deck lists, and he is now exposing himself to shock, so this actually works out fairly well for Paulo.
Yeah, can you run down what you meant by protect his Grimflayer with the Walking Ballista?
So if Paulo opted to shock the Grimflayer without Delirium, Walking Ballista can remove the 1 counter it would have, head to the graveyard. There'd be artifact, creature, land, and sorcery in the graveyard.
Wow, and this is going to be a disaster scenario for Jan Ksandr because he's lining up to take 4, though. It looks like he's already got a Fatal Push in hand, so disaster averted. And Paulo's just passed the turn back here.
So the upside of leaving mana up for Jan is that he does get to Fatal Push the Heart of Kiran and avoid taking 4, but I think on balance, Paulo's happier because he does get to shock the Grimflayer here.
Yeah, he's decided to let Jan go to his turn. He doesn't have anything to fear as far as Blossoming Defense or something.
No, Jan is playing a more Delirium-heavy deck, doesn't have Blossoming Defense, so yeah. Paulo knows there's no punishment for waiting on shock here.
Okay, there's that Walking Ballista for 2.
And that was the other advantage of waiting for Jan's side, is that he does want to play the Walking Ballista for 2 and spend 4 mana to get 2 counters instead of 2 mana to get 1 counter. Luckily for Paulo, he has a backup Heart of Kiran, so even though he lost the first one and lost out on some damage, the fact that it's legendary doesn't actually matter here because the first one did die, so the second one is very, very relevant. Paulo deciding between playing Heart of Kiran. He could potentially play Dipala, and he even has Unlicensed Disintegration, it looks like. So one of the reasons to leave up something like Unlicensed Disintegration if he's worried about a Virtuous Gearhook, which in concert with Walking Ballista is a really good combo. You get to put a bunch of counters on your Ballista, hit for a bunch of damage, and then start removing the counters in order to deal damage. Paulo there, meaning that Paulo also, one reason to play the 3-drop instead of playing Heart of Kiran is next turn if he plays a land, he can play Heart of Kiran and Unlicensed Disintegration. He needs to draw an untapped land to do that, but it does make it more likely that he has a more efficient next turn.
All right, so there's Grasp of Darkness now from Jan Ksandr. We saw him put one of those on top of his library earlier. He finds good use for it now and is able to start attacking. He's not the aggressor here, but hey, getting in for a couple of damage is good.
He has decided, I think once again, whether he wants to play a 1/1 Walking Ballista or not. Because if he draws a land who wants to play Virtuous Gearhook, I do really like playing just the other Ballista out here.
He gives him such powerful options with that Gearhook if he hits. In the meantime, Scrap Heap Scrounger, truly one of the all-stars of this tournament. We have seen that card everywhere in the feature match area. Has been doing good work for Paulo. It's got Jan Ksandr down to 14, and with the follow-up Heart of Kiran, Paulo has a nice, powerful attacks lined up, though. Did Jan hit that land?
Looks like Jan hit a tireless tracker, which it once landed. It does. It of course is not a land itself. So the good thing though for Jan is though, since he has grasp, he's got the walking ballistas. Paulo doesn't have another creature to crew the heart without tapping the Scrounger. So at this point, the race is actually going just fine for Jan, especially with Virgo's Gearhulk in hand, which represents a ton of extra damage. And also, if Jan leaves mana up for Grasp and Paulo chooses not to crew Heart of Kiran, Jan can just spend the mana, making one of the walking ballistas a little bit bigger, which is certainly not a waste of a turn.
And he's just going to pass the turn back. Paulo took the 3 damage. Paulo's now facing down 4 open mana from his opponent, Jan Ksandr. He is just going to attack, it looks like, with the Scrounger.
Yeah, and again, this is Paulo thinking like, well, Jan passed with a bunch of mana up, he might have another Grasp. I shouldn't attack with Heart of Kiran here.
And as you described a minute ago here, Luis, Jan says, well, okay, fine. If I'm not going to use my mana on that Grasp of Darkness, I'll just put a +1/+1 counter of one of these walking ballistas. It's not a super potent use, but hey, at least he gets to use his mana.
Yeah, it's certainly better than doing nothing, and casting Grasp of Darkness on Scrap Heap Scrounger is not all that exciting either. You're deciding whether he wants to spread the counters out more or just make a 3/3. One of the advantages of spreading the counters out more like he did is he's less vulnerable to a removal spell here. Well, this could add some more pressure to the board as well. Rishkar Pima Renegade can put a ++1 counter on each walking ballista. Not quite lethal. That would let Jan attack for 6 and then have 6 damage to shoot with, but still getting very, very close.
Right, Rishkar Pima Renegade hits the battlefield. And he's just going to go ahead and target both of the walking ballistas. And this one's going to get away from Paulo pretty quickly.
Yeah, even though Paulo has unlicensed disintegration, he's losing this race quite badly and is also just very far behind on board, especially given that Jan has 2 action spells in hand.
What went wrong for Paulo here?
He had a couple turns where he wasn't able to play more threats, and thanks to his mulligan, he was actually just behind on cards the whole time as well.
Okay, he's going to take a damage from his Spire of Industry to make black mana so that he can do this. With that ability on the stack, he's going to take a couple of damage from the ballista. Actually, I spoke too soon. Jan's going to actually use it to just take down the Scrap Heap Scrounger, but of course the other trigger from Rishkar still happens. That means a 3/3 walking ballista gets to attack for 3. Knock Paulo down to 9. And put this one precarious for Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa. Jan Ksandr looking really good here in game 1.
Yeah, Paulo's going to need to draw multiple action spells in a row in order to get back into this. He can get the Scrap Heap Scrounger back and crew Heart of Kiran, which he might have to do defensively here, since otherwise he's getting threatened to be attacked for lethal. But even at that point, Jan has the Grasp to stop the Heart. He also, if he draws a land, he can play a Gearhulk. So Jan is actually in really good shape now that he's drawn, especially another Grasp, just to make sure Paulo can't realistically get back into this. One of the things the honest think about here is if he animates Hissing Quagmire, that actually does threaten lethal, whereas right now, well, if Paulo takes it, this is actually lethal because he would deal 5 damage, putting Paulo down to 4, and then be able to put another counter on Walking Ballista by spending 4 and deal the last 4. But even if Paulo animates or gets to bring back the Scrounger to make Heart of Kiran, that actually puts Paulo to 8 thanks to the Spire of Industry, which means that the Grasp on the Heart of Kiran would in fact still be lethal here.
All right, here comes that Grasp to take down the Heart of Kiran, and that's going to take down Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa as well. So Jan Ksandr impressively wins game 1 there. Paulo did have to take a mulligan, like you said. He didn't have the best draw, but Jan just sort of methodically worked his way through that game, drew a bunch of removal spells, had just enough threats to keep the heat up, and earn the concession there from Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa. So that is game 1 going to Jan Ksandr. We have a lot more Magic lined up for you here, but we'll be back after these messages. They're going to send somebody in. So, are you on this one?
I'm on this one. I can switch.
You're on this one now?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think you need to switch, but it could be that. Can you grab that headset? Like, is it this? No, it's not.
Can you hear me? Okay. You're not starting sideboarding now, right? Oh, you're right. Sorry. Yes, that's correct. My bad.
And welcome back to the feature match area here in Dublin, Ireland. We're here for Pro Tour Aether Revolt. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Luis Scott Vargas. We've got a lot of Magic action here. We're in quarterfinal stage 1. Now we're going to jump over to our other table where we have Martin Juza from Team Channel Fireball Fire. He's playing against Eduardo Sajgalik, who is playing for MTG Mint Card. And we've got Jund Energy Aggro in the hands of Martin Juza. Kind of a deck that he made himself and with his team, and he was one of the only people running a deck like that versus Mardu Vehicles, a deck we've grown quite familiar with here.
Yeah, apparently Matt Severa, who actually loves Mardu Vehicles himself, actually built the Jund Energy Aggro deck. Martin made some changes to it, tested it all week with Channel Fireball Fire, and then ended up being the only person who believed at the end of the week. Though I'm sure some of his other teammates are looking at his record in the standard portion and thinking, man, maybe I should have played that deck.
All right, here's one of the Hallmark's Long Tusk Cup. You'll see Voltaic Brawlers here as well. On the other side of the table, though, that is a dreamy start for Eduardo. You can see he's got the Heart of Kirin and the Toolcraft Exemplar, which is really a nice 1-2 punch. That has to be one of the best starts for the deck.
Well, that's the classic start. That's the one everyone fears. Long Tusk Cub, on the other hand, is a very potent threat in Martin's deck because not only does it grow kind of out of control quickly, it also not only fuels the other energy cards, but also gets powered by them. So getting to hit with a Long Tusk Cub always feels pretty good, and Martin's going to be pretty happy that he gets an unimpeded hit here.
That's right. And a Scrap Heap Scrounger as well. He's just going to leave those 2 energy banked there. He's not going to put the +1/+1 counter on the Cub just yet.
And that's a function of deck lists, actually. He knows that Eduardo Sajgalik does not have Shock in his main deck. He's got 2 in the sideboard, but none in the main. Against an unknown deck list during the Swiss portion of the event, Martin likely would have made the Long Tusk Cub a 3/3 on his turn to play around Shock, but he knows he doesn't have to do that here.
And here we go. A big hit here. No blockers for Martin Juza, so 7 damage from Eduardo Sajgalik. That is massive. He's already down to 10 as Martin Juza. We could have a quick one here. Remember, he's trying to be assertive here as well. He doesn't play the control game quite, and that means that he's going to need to find some pretty specific answers, though. I do see an Unlicensed Disintegration at the top of his hand there, which will help stem the bleeding.
Yeah, Unlicensed Disintegration is going to be pretty swingy here. This is where Eduardo's, though, 4 copies of Fatal Push in his main deck really shine. And Martin likes his Mardu Vehicles matchup. Defeated it a number of times in the Swiss portion of the rounds, but the fact that Eduardo has 4 Fatal Push in his deck is not great news for Martin. This is the Mardu Vehicles deck Martin actually didn't want to play against, the one that has the most copies of the Efficient Removal spell in hand.
And is this Martin deciding if he'd like to use that energy for the Long Tusk Cub here?
It is, because Eduardo has Fatal Push in hand. I would assume that he has a lot of incentive to Fatal Push that Long Tusk Cub, so he wants to give Martin the opportunity to spend energy first.
Every bit of energy can matter, especially given Martin Juza's hand. He has multiple copies of Unlicensed Disintegration in his hand. He actually has the ability to deal with the threats on Eduardo's side of the battlefield here. So Martin's just going to take it easy and say, okay, you take 5. And kind of force the issue. If Eduardo decides, that Cub does just need to die, then Martin benefits by keeping 2 energy around. Oh, Eduardo's just going to take it.
Yep.
He wants to see what Martin puts on the battlefield. And remember, that's 2 more energy also for Martin Juza.
Yep.
And that was important. Because that Greenbelt Rampager coming down here gobbled up 2 of the energy and still left 2 behind, and another copy of Long Tusk Cub. Though, look at this from Eduardo. He just shows him, I've got Fatal Push and I've got Unlicensed Disintegration. I'm just going to kill your creatures here and then kill you. That's going to be game 1. Eduardo Sajgalik really put a stomping on Juza. That turn looked pretty good for Martin. He got in for damage, developed out his board, but Eduardo had exactly the combination of threats and removal spells that he needed to take down game 1 there. So 1 to the good for the Canadian, playing for Team MTG Mint card. With Mardu Vehicles.
Do you remember Mateo or CJ?
Get a little wider view of our feature match area. We had 3 tables going there for the Swiss portion over the last few days, but now we've got it down to just 2 here for our top 8.
Yeah, that last game really shows how much the advantage of being able to go 1 drop, 2 drop, 2 drop plus 1 drop. That's really how Eduardo was able to leverage that.
Yeah, and just to make it clear, he used Removal Spell to take away all available blockers and had 10 power worth of attackers, so that was it.
Yeah, the Unlicensed Disintegration got the last 3 points.
The 3 points itself, that's right. Attacked for 7, and that was it. Okay, so this is a quick start here for Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa as we transition back to our other quarterfinal stage 1 match, and a nice little 1-2 here from Paulo as well, though perhaps not the ideal one. Still, not bad at all. He's got Toolcraft Exemplar right into Veteran Motorist, and there's Pia Nalar as well.
Yeah, Jan currently on a Hissing Quagmire and no second land.
Yeah, this could be a very, very quick game for Paulo. We are playing best 3 out of 5 here in our quarterfinal.
Just because everyone's playing vehicles doesn't mean you have to race to the finish line.
Jeez,
no. 36-second game there.
No kidding. So that was Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa quickly stealing a game back from Jan Ksandr, who, 1 lander didn't quite get there for him. And that's going to even things up. So now we're back to the old way here, best 2 out of 3.
And of note, you played 2 pre-boarded games. So those 2 games were in game 1s, and then now the players reached for a sideboard. Actually, you could kind of hear a glimpse of it at the end of the first game when Paulo reached for a sideboard and Jan's like, are you sideboarding? And Paulo's like, right, I'm not supposed to do that. When you played 95% of your matches of Magic, best 2 out of 3, sideboard after game 1. So
Well, maybe 95% for you.
Paulo probably plays 80%.
Yeah, the rest of us play 99.99.
Yeah. Paulo's top 8 conversion rate is like 22% or something.
At the Pro
Tour. It's like, it's just absolutely insane.
He is completely insane.
Yeah, once I had vague dreams of catching Paulo.
You were hunting him down.
I came for him, but then
I forgot the side.
he's rattled off another top 8. So now he's 3 top 8s ahead of me. I don't have high hopes of catching him.
Oh, that's just one season for you.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, next year that'll do it.
All right, transitioning back over. So Eduardo able to beat Martin Juza convincingly in game 1. As you just mentioned, Luis, we are another pre-boarded game here, so there will be no sideboards involved in this game between the two players, and Martin now gets to be on the play. And when two decks are trying to be assertive, it is certainly a big advantage.
I'm still thinking about my hand. Yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead and get our players started here as they're examining their opening hands. Yeah, they're deciding on if they want to keep these or not.
Martin on a one-lander, but one-lander with a Tune with Aether and a Long Tusk Cub. So it's a pretty good curve. I mean, he wants to turn 1, search for land, get 2 energy, turn 2, play a Cub with already 2 energy at the ready. But if he doesn't hit lands later, then the hand does slow down a little bit. Though he has Long Tusk Cub and 2 Heart of Kiran. Basically what Martin's worried about is this hand is very vulnerable to Fatal Push. Because if this Long Tusk Cub gets Fatal Pushed, the 2 Hearts of Kiran don't really do all that much, and he doesn't have enough mana to cast Tireless Tracker, or he's very far away from Fleet Wheel Cruiser. So I think that Martin unsurprisingly did choose to keep this hand. Turn 1 a Tune, turn 2 Long Tusk Cub is hard to mulligan, but that's really what the whole strength of the hand is, and he has to just hope that Eduardo does not have a Fatal Push at the ready. Which currently he doesn't. Eduardo actually not only doesn't have Fatal Push, he doesn't have black mana, because that Spire of Industry is not going to be on quite yet.
Juza will be relieved to see that if that holds steady. And here we go. He's going to play a Heart of Kiran first, and then play the Cub. He's got the 2 energy banked in it already so that he can actually crew that Heart of Kiran next turn.
Yeah, and having the 2 energy is as you point out, why that this line of play makes sense. This does play around Fatal Push a little bit better.
All right, well, 3 1-drops on the battlefield now for Eduardo Sajgalik. He's got a pair of Thraben Inspectors, and of course those Inspectors bringing the clues along mean that the Toolcraft Exemplar gets to attack for 3 rather than just 1. So moving things along, not as explosive as a start though as we saw from Eduardo in game 1.
Yeah, Thraben Inspector is an incredible card. It has a lot of different synergies going on. It's a human for cards like Thalia's Lieutenant, which not in this top 8, but still a very potent card. Provides an artifact for cards like Toolcraft Exemplar. Can enable Revolt by sacrificing the clue, all those things. But it only has 1 power, so flooding the board with the 1-drops not quite as impressive as if it was 2 Toolcraft Exemplars and a Thraben Inspector, then we'd be talking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It does its role, but it is a little slow for what this deck's trying to do. Cracking clues takes some serious time, and Martin Juza's deck is very capable of applying a lot of pressure, so looks like he's going to go for a Tireless Tracker here on turn 3.
And I wouldn't be surprised if he just passed without attacking with Heart of Kiran, because he could attack for 4, but then he's taking 5 on the backswing. The disadvantage, though, of not attacking is if Eduardo has a removal spell for the Heart, then you cost yourself 4 damage, essentially.
It's a disaster, yeah. He doesn't get to attack with it or block with it.
Though, what Martin can do to play around that if he wants is just pass with Tireless Tracker untapped, and then try to block with that, and then if it gets removed, use the Heart. But in this particular case, he just chose to take the free 4 damage, or rather the safe 4 damage for now.
What does Eduardo have here? Well, he's got a Veteran Motorist. That's fine. But once again, Martin Juza probably thinks that's okay. I mean, Eduardo's been using his mana building out his board. It can't be great for him, but
no vehicles at the ready.
Yeah.
And even though Martin's taking 5 here, Martin has a pretty decent force. Martin really wants to draw a land so he can play 2 Long Tusk Cubs next turn or a Fleet Wheel Cruiser. The 2 Cubs do advance his board a bit more. He wouldn't mind drawing a 1-mana removal spell either. Something like A shock would be pretty interesting, or even something like Greenbelt Rampager wouldn't be bad. Basically, Martin either needs to draw a land so he can play 2 spells, or a 1-mana spell. What is a disaster for Martin is if he draws like one of his 4 drops. And even drawing a 2-drop is not all that exciting, because this game is really going to come down to whether Martin can play 2 spells on the next turn to kind of stay ahead, or rather to catch up, because Eduardo has gotten to deploy a lot more cards here.
Both bottom.
Looks like you put him on the bottom there.
These 2 for sure.
3.
This one for sure. He's not very good on defense.
Attack for 5 here.
Yeah, the Sweep Inspectors don't have a obvious good block, so attacking with them makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he's just going to jam, and that is going to put Martin Juza down to 12 as Eduardo passes the turn back to him. Greenbelt Rampager off the top for Martin.
There we go. That was a relevant card for Martin. He's going to get to play it this turn, because he can play it to go down to 1 energy, then use Aether Hub, go down to 0 energy to play a Long Tusk Cub. So he still gets to play 2 spells this turn, even though it depletes his energy reserves. Alternately, Martin could play Long Tusk Cub, immediately eat 2 energy, and then play the Greenbelt Rampager to generate an energy, but he would have to spend a green with Aether Hub, so that actually is a loop that doesn't generate anything, except it lets him crew his Heart of Kiran.
Right, he can do that. That's kind of a neat trick.
Yeah, I've seen him do it multiple times this tournament, where he plays Greenbelt Rampager, crews Heart of Kiran, then returns Greenbelt Rampager because he doesn't have sufficient energy to keep it around.
A lot of options here for Martin Juza, and as you've seen, the players are taking their time on each of these turns, because in these aggressive matchups, it doesn't take much to really derail a plan. You do not have a lot of wiggle room here. Also, Eduardo Sajgalik holding up that Spire of Industry, which can make any color of mana for him at this point, and Fatal Push is certainly on the docket.
Yeah, he's certainly representing Fatal Push. I think if I'm Martin at this point, I'm not as worried about Fatal Push as you would be otherwise, because you're just so far behind that it's not going to be that easy to defeat it. But if he has the opportunity to play around it, he might go ahead and try.
Okay, there's a Greenbelt Rampager. He's just going to let it gobble up the 2 energy. It doesn't ask.
No.
If you've got the 2 energy, it just eats it.
Elephants tell, they do not ask.
Yes. Okay, and that's going to allow him to attack for a whopping 7 damage here. Eduardo, is he going to trade?
Well, by attacking this way, Martin indicates he doesn't have a land in hand. Otherwise, he would have played a land to generate a Clue Tyrus Tracker.
Yeah.
So, Eduardo has that information. I like the trade there because Eduardo doesn't have a vehicle to crew, and the veteran motorist isn't necessarily able to get past either the Heart of Kiran or the Greenbelt Rampager once those cards are active. Though Heart of Kiran, not currently there.
That was Fatal Push off the top there from Eduardo.
That was good. It would have been fantastic the turn prior, because Eduardo does have a Gideon that he may want to play this turn, but he could still play Veteran Motorist and Fatal Push if he wanted to deploy both of those.
But yeah, we need to...
So he gets to attack for 5 if he Fatal Pushes the Long Tusk Cub. And then also play the Veteran Motorist that would drop Martin to 7, and then you would have the 4 creatures in play.
Yeah, I think we're going to need that crowd noise. The other crowd. I am thinking about my play, by the way. That's right. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, it's not a easy play anyways.
You heard it from Eduardo. This is not an easy play to decide what to do.
12.
Eduardo could also play, if he plays Gideon and makes an emblem, then he gets to attack with all 3 of his creatures, and the Long Tusk Cub has no good blocks, because remember, without any energy, the Cub can't crew that Heart of Kiran right now. So that would be an attack for 8. That would drop Martin to 4 if Martin doesn't block anything. That seems like a pretty good way to start, because it lets those Raven Inspectors get by that Long Tusk Cub.
All right, Gideon, Emblem, big attacks.
We got 12.
And even if Martin was able to crew Heart of Kiran, it would not be lethal next turn. Though Martin's actually very close with that Fleet Wheel Cruiser in hand if he draws a land, but he'd be able to crew Heart of Kiran in the attack for 11, put Eduardo to 1, so not quite there.
Eduardo did not use that Spire of Industry. That's how close some of these games are going to be. In the meantime, he's jamming. He's getting in there.
I think he missed it too.
This leaves no great blocks for Martin Juza.
So this is what, 4, 2, and 2.
You could chump the Toolcraft Exemplar and take 4.
That's what damage.
Yeah, that's
Otherwise, he just takes the full 8. And then Martin has to look at what is he doing next turn. What is his optimal plays? He's got a Long Tusk Cub, which doesn't do a whole lot right now. A second Heart of Kieran doesn't do a whole lot, and a Fleetwheel Cruiser, which if he draws a land, he can play, but he's still facing down potentially lethal next turn. So it's going to be a hard one for Martin to get out of here. Deciding whether he wants to cash in Long Tusk Cub for 4 life right now. And that leaves him still dead to this attack next turn if he has no blockers. So then his best option is to Fleetwheel Cruiser if he draws a land, hit Eduardo to 7, have a Greenbelt Rampager and a Heart of Kieran untapped to potentially block. So Martin's really trying to plan ahead. How do I win this game? What is my next turn going to look like in a game that I win? And things are looking grim right now.
They look pretty bad for Martin Juza at the moment. Remember, there's a Fatal Push in hand for Eduardo as well to help break up some blockers.
It means that, yeah, next turn Martin can't rely on any particular blockers here.
He's just going to take it all.
Yeah. Go, don't top deck whatever it is you need.
Eduardo says, please don't top deck whatever it is that you need. But it turns out Martin needs multiple things here to go right for him.
Yeah, he drew a Voltaic Brawler, which is kind of interesting. He could play it, crew Heart of Kieran, use the 2 energy to pump Long Tusk Cub, attack for 10, drop Eduardo to 2, and die on the backswing.
Yeah.
So, a game of inches, and Martin's only able to play 1 card this turn. Eduardo going to be able to use Fatal Push next turn to make things very difficult for Martin. He's going to need essentially 2 blockers after the Fatal Push. So he's going to need 3 blockers in order to get out of this. And Martin can find 3 blockers, but then he's in a position where he's not making any headway.
Right, he's just chump blocking or at best trading.
So if Martin plays a Voltaic Brawler, he can crew Heart of Kieran attack for 4, and then essentially have 3 blockers up, because if Eduardo tries to kill one of the 2 untapped creatures, it can crew the Heart of Kieran. So that could leave Martin in a spot where he gets to hit for 4 and then pass with at least decent blocks up. Hope that Eduardo doesn't really have anything to make things more difficult. Unfortunately, that Fatal Push will do so.
Okay, Martin's going to crew the Heart of Kieran and attack for 4 in the air.
8.
Eduardo says, sure. I'll go down to 8. Can't do anything about it anyway. But the writing's on the wall here.
Draw.
Eduardo Sajgalik draws his card for the turn. He's got Fatal Push and
4, right?
Veteran Motorist in hand.
And he drew Dapala, which does make that Toolcraft Exemplar 1/1 bigger if he wants to play the Dapala. So now if Eduardo cast Fatal Push on let's say the Greenbelt Rampager, because it's slightly bigger, Martin will in response crew Heart of Kieran. And then if Eduardo attacks with all of his creatures, actually that doesn't work out all that well for him, because the Toolcraft Exemplar trades for Heart of Kieran, and the Long Tusk Cub eats the 2 energy, becomes a 3/3, eats a Thraben Inspector, Paulo falls to 2. So you traded Toolcraft Exemplar and Thraben Inspector for Heart of Kieran. You do get to play Paulo though, if you want afterwards, or play Veteran Motorist. Eduardo also has some clues he could crack, though. Cracking a clue seems a little ambitious here, because if you draw another spell, then instead of playing 2 spells this turn, you only play 1.
Right.
Also possible, Eduardo can just attack with Toolcraft Exemplar.
Trigger.
Yeah, it looks like that's what he's decided to do.
And just offer a trade for either Greenbelt Rampager or Heart of Kieran.
The Exemplar's currently sitting at 3 toughness.
Thanks to Gideon Emblem, and then of course the trigger. But no first strike, because only 2 artifacts in play.
Right. So Martin could trade off for, well, really any of these creatures. He could put an energy. He could use his energy to trade off the Cub. He could trade off the Rampager. If he wanted, he could even crew up the Heart of Kieran and trade that. You know, he does have an additional copy of Heart of Kiran in his hand. There could be something to be said for that.
That gives him incentive to trade there. One reason not to trade Heart of Kiran is that you really just want to put Eduardo on a 2-turn clock, so you just want the one in play.
Yeah.
That Fatal Push is going to be still very difficult for Martin to beat here.
It's a 4-2, right? You didn't have 3 artifacts, right? This is not an artifact.
No,
Okay,
you have 2. Yeah.
Okay, well, he's blocking with the Cub, but right now he still needs to use the energy if he wants to actually trade, and he does.
A 4-3.
Yeah. You didn't ask, so yeah.
So veteran motorist, and it looks like Eduardo's just going to keep up Fatal Push for the Heart of Kiran next turn.
Yeah.
Ooh. I saw an unlicensed disintegration going on top of the library there for Eduardo. The veteran motorist really doing work for him. That's his second one of the game, and getting through his library, getting to these key spells has been so important. That was a land off the top, by the way, for Martin Juza.
Unfortunately for Martin, it was a game trail, which will enter the battlefield tapped here, so he's going to be unable to play that Fleet Wheel Cruiser this turn. That unlicensed disintegration is going to be extremely difficult to beat here, because it means that Eduardo only has to sneak in 1 point of damage and gets to play Disintegration and Fatal Push, 2 removal spells.
Martin's trying to maintain that clock, but as you can see, Eduardo's only going to take 1, not 4 here.
That's why that was the card, not the kitty.
As he uses Fatal Push to take down that Heart of Kiran.
Yeah, and that forces Martin to play Long Tusk Cub, because he needs to have 2 blockers here to not die to the 2 Thraben Inspectors.
Okay. Sure.
And of course, Eduardo.
At 4.
He's going to be able to finish things off quite cleanly here with that unlicensed disintegration that was sitting on top of his library. He can take out the Greenbelt Rampager, knock Martin down to just 1, attack easily.
Yeah, even through a shock, this is lethal.
Yes.
Since Eduardo will have 3 attackers against 1 blocker with Martin at 1, so.
Eduardo taking his time making sure, but he just comes to the conclusion that, no, this is it. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to fall down to 6.
I'm just double checking because,
He's just making sure. You know, this is a high-pressure situation, so Eduardo's just being extra careful. But yes, unlicensed disintegration on the Elephant.
Go to 1.
Greenbelt Rampager. And that's going to put Martin Juza down to 1.
Yep.
And that's going to be the game. So Eduardo Sajgalik is able to pick up both pre-sideboarded games here off of Martin Juza. And that means, of course, that they're going to go and start shuffling. As they head into those sideboarded games, they're going to be consulting the boards. We'll talk about those in a little bit. We're transitioning back over to Jan Ksandr and Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa, who are, in fact, getting ready to get their sideboards on. By the way, check this out. There's our viewing area. Lots of locals, lots of players. You see some Team Genesis. There's Team MTG Mint card. And they're all cheering on their favorite Magic player, or their teammates, as it were.
Yeah, Eduardo Sajgalik on Team MTG Mint card.
That's right. And, of course, even better, you can play a little Magic, too.
Oh, yeah, side drafts.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so we've got some graphics to take a look at here as far as the sideboards go for our other match, Jan Ksandr versus Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa. Let's take a look at those right now, Luis. Jan, here's his sideboard. Remember, Paulo is playing Mardu Vehicle, so what is he bringing in?
Certainly the 3 Fatal Pushes. They're critical against Heart of Kiran, as we saw in this last game. And then Appetite for the Unnatural is a card that Green-Black often wants against the Vehicles decks. A lot of Jan's sideboard looks like it's dedicated to control. You know, Transgress the Minds, all these Planeswalkers, Lifecrafters, Bestiary. So I feel like Jan built his deck with vehicles in mind and just has not a ton of cards to sideboard in, which generally is a good sign for the matchup.
Let's take a look at what Paulo has in his sideboard here. It's funny seeing those blue cards in there.
Yeah, and blue lands. He's got 2 Spirebluff Canals in his sideboard. Again, Paulo, like a lot of players you'll see in the top 8, Jan included, they have their sideboard geared to beat control, their main deck geared to beat aggro and mid-range. So Paulo has these Spirebluff Canals, Ceremonious Rejections, and Metallic Rebukes. Those are to bring in against Torrential Gearhulk decks more than something like Black-Green. So Fatal Push is a card Paulo may want, Chandra, Torch of Defiance, but past that, he's, again, not all that unhappy with his main deck configuration.
He's not bringing in those silver bullet type cards, though, is he?
No, neither player is bringing in anything too absurd. Fatal Push is quite good, so Jan does get access to that. But for the most part, these post-board games are not going to play out significantly differently than pre-board games in terms of what cards you're going to see.
All right, so Jan Ksandr's on 5 cards here, Luis. So an unfortunate mulligan for him, as he's also kicking things off on the play.
Whereas only one of the mulligans unfortunate, the other one was just okay.
I think both were unfortunate in this scenario.
Well, Jan's getting a little bit back though, because Paulo does not have a 2-drop. So and his 1-drop was Thraben Inspector. So that is not the most impressive opening from the vehicle side either.
Not at all. Paulo is using his mana, but rather slowly here as he's working his way through with that clue and still just attacking for 1 a turn.
Paulo actually ran into a kind of awkward interaction there where he had to use the clue because he had nothing better to do on turn 2, but it turned off his Spire of Industry for that turn, so he couldn't play something like DePaula on turn 3. He is forced to play a colorless card instead, the Cultivator's Caravan. Though, of course, that does now solve all of Paulo's mana problems.
Right.
I will say, though, Jan not having a play on 2 mana is pretty big for Paulo because one of the cards in Paulo's hand, Gideon Alexander, of which he actually has 2 copies, is exactly what you want against a removal-heavy hand, and that is presumably what Jan is running here.
Yeah, you would assume that Jan has something like a removal spell in hand that he just didn't want to fire off on that Thraben Inspector, right?
There aren't very many cards in Jan's deck that can't be cast off 2 mana. It's a relatively low-curve deck, even for a Delirium deck, and that means that if Jan isn't playing anything on 2 mana, then he probably has at least 1 removal spell, if not 2. Mind Wreck Demon pretty good against Gideon, though. That actually makes Paulo's plans a little bit worse.
Big 4/5 flyer here for Jan Ksandr, and the good news is for Paulo that if he can crew up that Cultivator's Caravan, that'll be just fine at attacking through, though you mentioned that Gideon was a play that Paulo's likely to make here, or at least wanted to make, and the Demon kind of does mess with that plan significantly.
Paulo actually has maybe some incentive to attack here. He has a Fatal Push in hand. He could enable Revolt by attacking Thraben Inspector into Mind Rack Demon. Paulo could also go Gideon, Emblem, Fatal Push as a way to enable Revolt. And Paulo could unlicense Disintegration. One reason not to unlicense Disintegration, though, is Paulo's hand is so expensive, and if he plays Disintegration, he's just only playing 1 spell this turn. He really wants to start getting multiple things going because he's got a bunch of 3-drops in hand, and playing one of the 3-drops on 5 mana is very unappealing. Like, Paulo's a very powerful hand. Double Gideon.
He has double Gideon, so that makes that line that you described even more appealing.
Yeah. DePaula, Pianalar, so...
Make an emblem, Paulo. That is sweet. Nothing like getting an emblem to get your Fatal Push online as far as Revolt goes. And Jan Ksandr's like, really? That just happened? And he's going to take still only a couple of damage this turn, but that emblem's sticking around, and it's going to be pretty annoying going down the stretch.
Yeah, just how they drew it up.
Yeah, that's the best way to enable Revolt is to ultimate a Planeswalker.
And this means that if Paulo draws a land next turn, he can play Pia and DePaula, and Pia represents 5 power with the Gideon Emblem in play, and then DePaula will be a 4/4 itself. So that's a lot of power for not a lot of mana.
Jan has multiple options in his hand here. See, he's got Kalitas as well as Verdurous Gearhulk. He doesn't quite have the mana for that, and then a pair of removal spells. So he's just going to kick off with Kalitas. That makes sense. If he can untap with that and have those removal spells, it could give him a chance to fight his way back.
Well, this actually gives Jan a pretty good chance here, because if Paulo doesn't have a way to kill Kalitas, which he does not currently right now, it does mean that he still has unlicensed Disintegration, and because he drew Cultivator's Caravan, basically Paulo has to judge how risky it is to let Jan untap with Kalitas in play, and I think it's substantially risky. Yeah. Because first of all, you still have that read. Remember, Paulo didn't forget that Jan didn't play anything on 2 mana earlier. So Paulo is going to be aware of that, and he doesn't want to get hit by, like, Grasp of Darkness here.
Yeah, Jan already starts to pick it up. He knows that's what Paulo's doing. Now, again, Paulo's just slowly chipping away, but the truth of the matter is that 5 damage that turn, even with just the Thraben Inspector as his only real threat so far, Paulo's significantly ahead in this game. That mulligan to 5 was really tough for Jan, even though he has been able to deploy spells pretty consistently.
What Paulo's doing also is setting up. Like, remember, he got to play a Cultivator's Caravan this turn, so now he has 6 mana. He's got Gideon Emblem, so his long-term prospects are good. So even though, yes, he's only attacking with the 1 Thraben Inspector, Paulo is pulling ahead every turn. So now Paulo gets to... He can play Gideon plus Thraben Inspector, or he can play Pia, Nalar plus DePaula, or the 2 very appealing plays. Though also if he wants to attack with Cultivator's Caravan, something like Gideon, make a knight, crew a caravan, or he could go... Gideon, make a knight, crew a caravan, attacks for a decent amount of damage, then he plays another Thraben Inspector.
Yeah, he attacks for 8 in that scenario. This one's getting out of hand pretty quickly. Okay, there's Gideon. There's a 3/3 knight. But Jan's actually going to respond. He's going to take down the Thraben Inspector with the knight trigger on the stack. And what he's going to do this for is to prevent the ability to crew. Or actually, he can still crew. Why did he do that right then?
To attempt to prevent the ability to crew.
But it didn't work because it's still a 3/3 knight.
Because the Gideon Emblem enables the Cultivator's Caravan by itself.
Yeah, he did save himself from damage by doing that, even if that wasn't his primary intention. It was 2 damage that he saved, but unfortunately he still takes 6, and he's going to drop down to 5. So Jan Ksandr looking in terrible shape here in game number 3, the first sideboarded game. He is facing massive pressure from the Hall of Famer Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa.
And now he, in the unenviable position of using Fatal Push on like a knight token.
Yeah, what can he even draw here at this point? Gideon sitting back there. There's 2 Cultivators Caravans. A land off the top for Jan Ksandr is no bueno. And this one looks like it's going to go to Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa. Now, the match would not end at that point, though. Still
it would not.
Playing best 3 out of 5. So it's the first player to get to 3 wins in the match. This one's going to give Paulo his 2nd victory and put him tantalizingly close. He's got a lot of work to do today, Paulo. Has to be said he's the best player in the top 8, at least based on resume and probably everything else that you want to throw at him.
Yeah, and, mostly resume, also play skill.
But also play skill, yes. And that is going to do it there. So Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa with Mardu Vehicles picks up game number 3.
Unquestionably one of the best 5 players to ever play the game, and a lot of people have him 3rd. Though he has passed, as BDM mentioned, Kai Buddha in terms of overall number of Pro Tour top 8s, which is not something to be taken lightly.
Okay, well, that means that we're going to be switching back over to Martin Juza versus Eduardo Sajgalik. Why don't we take a look at their sideboards here, because they're now entering the same phase that we just had for our other match there. There's the trophy, by the way. If you win the PT, you get your name on one of those little plaques, and it just stays there forever.
That's what I've heard.
I've seen it. I've seen your name on there. All right, let's take a look at Martin Juza's sideboard here for his Jund Energy Aggro deck. What are you seeing?
So I actually spent some time with Team Channel Fireball Fire and Martin last night as they were playtesting the Mardu Vehicles matchup against Eduardo's deck, of course. And they were pretty excited about the sideboard plan because Martin gets to bring in the old 1-2 punch. He gets to bring in a bunch of 1-drops, Fatal Push and Shock, and a bunch of 5-drops, Sky Sovereign Console Flagship and Virtuous Gearhulk. He gets to side out Planeswalkers and Tireless Tracker, is what they were talking about, and basically bring in cheap removal, which lets you survive until you play the boat, the Sky Sovereign. This is the headliner because it comes into play. Each one of Eduardo's creatures, and the next turn threatens to smash in for 6, eat another creature. Virtuous Gearhulk, yes, it gets hit by Unlicensed Disintegration. It's immune to Fatal Push, and it just makes the rest of your team very big. So I really like the sideboard plan of powerful 5-drops plus good 1-drop removal, and it really transforms how Martin's deck plays out.
And on the other side of the table, Eduardo Sajgalik, he has a little bit wider of a sideboard here. What are you seeing here?
He has a few less options because he, again, is a little bit more, hedging his bets. He's got Painful Truths and Metallic Rebuke against Control, Spell Queller against something like Aetherworks Marvel, Fragmentize against other vehicles decks. What that leaves him is Shocks, which he may or may not board in. Shock does have utility, but it doesn't always kill Long Tusk Cub. It kills Voltaic Brawler. Doesn't kill Greenbelt Rampager or Heart of Kiran. Killing Scrap Heap Scrounger is not that impressive. So Shock is a maybe. Sky Whaler's Shot certainly coming in to kill Virtuous Gearhulk and even like all the other, even the 2-drops all have 3 power. And then Fumigate is an option. Martin doesn't have as many vehicles as Eduardo does, so Fumigate could catch him by surprise, but now that they have deckless and you see Sky Sovereign Console Flagship and you're looking at your Fumigate, you're like, this doesn't line up as well as I would like. So I think Eduardo is mostly just doing like minor swaps rather than a transformational plan such that Martin did.
There's Martin Juza. And Eduardo. So things have gone swimmingly so far for Eduardo. 2 convincing wins in the first 2 games of this quarterfinal stage 1, and that of course has put Martin Juza in the unenviable position of needing to rattle off 3 in a row against Eduardo in order to advance. It's going to be tough. Let's see if he can do it. 1 mana spells for each player. Attune with Aether for Martin Juza is going to give him some energy and a land. On the other side of the table, Thraben Inspector. So solid little start for both.
Martin has a pretty efficient hand too. He can, because of the attune, he can now play a Greenbelt Rampager to eat that 2 energy. One of the decisions he's got here is he can, leave up Shock. He could play a tap Cinderglade, though I guess since he has a swamp in hand, he doesn't have as much need of doing that. He really is hoping this Greenbelt Rampager goes the distance though, because it doesn't look like he's got another threat in hand. So Fatal Push is a card Martin really does not want to see here.
All right, it's time to ride this elephant, see if he can go the distance. Like you said, he really doesn't want to see a Fatal Push from his opponent, Eduardo Sajgalik, though I don't believe he has one in his hand.
No, Eduardo's got all threats, pairs of Veteran Motorists and Heart of Kiran, though. It looks like an unlicensed Disintegration, so that elephant may not be long for this world. Eduardo haven't decided whether he wants to play Heart of Kiran or Veteran Motorist this turn. Heart attacks for more next turn, but getting the Scry value from Veteran Motorist sooner rather than later could help if Eduardo's looking for something to play next turn.
Yeah, does he have a land drop to hit?
He has lands in hand, yeah.
Okay. So I think it makes sense here to play the Heart of Kiran, then he can play the Veteran Motorist next turn, accrue it, and smash for 5.
Voltaic Brawler, pretty good draw for Martin. Martin also, with an unlicensed Disintegration, he can leave the mana out for that if he wants to use that on the Heart of Kiran instead.
First Blood goes to Martin Juza. He's got Eduardo Sajgalik down to 17, and he has a decent follow-up play here with this Voltaic Brawler. This thing hits very hard. 2 mana, and it attacks as a 4/3 Trampler, thanks to the energy.
Yeah, one of the key selling points about Martin's deck is that he's got 1 mana 3/4s, 2 mana 4/3s. Long Tusk Cub is kind of like a 2 mana 3/3 or a 4/4. So his creatures are very overstated compared to something like the Vehicles deck that 1 mana 1/2s. I guess 1 mana 3/2 is pretty big, but Martin's just a little bit bigger. So one of the ways Josh Utterlayton described Martin's deck is it's the Mardu Vehicles deck that beats the mirror, because Martin still has Heart of Kiran and Fleetwheel Cruiser. He's still got some vehicles in his deck. He's just choosing larger green creatures instead of smaller white creatures.
You can see Martin Juza. Also, you'll note that the players are wearing their team jerseys. This is the first Pro Tour where we've unveiled our team competition. They're 6-player teams. Martin Juza is playing for Team Channel Fireball Fire, and they're going to keep totals of pro points earned from the whole team to culminate in a team competition later in the season. Eduardo's on Team MTG Mint Card. We got a chance to see his teammate sitting in the front row rooting him on as well. This has added an interesting and dynamic layer to the coverage here too.
I've been loving the team series.
Yeah.
I think it's an awesome improvement. So Eduardo passed up playing anything, and if I'm Martin, I'm just thinking, okay, he's got unlicensed Disintegration. There's almost no chance he does not. Because you have a Heart of Kiran that doesn't do anything. You have a Thraben Inspector. You're not just going to sit there cracking the clue. And that is a potential reason that Martin would think about not spending the energy on the Voltaic Brawler. I like Eduardo's aggressive placement of that unlicensed disintegration.
I don't think that there's encroachment in Magic, but that would have been if there were.
Well, you know, you already don't have a license. Like, what else do you have to lose?
Yeah, seriously. Though there is no question to what he was targeting.
Yeah.
So Voltaic Brawler is going to get disintegrated, and Martin Juza passes the turn back with 4 mana. That has to look suspicious to Eduardo as well, right?
I would assume from Eduardo's side you're thinking about unlicensed disintegration of Martin's. Martin drew a game trail that turn. That was the turn he really wanted to draw, you know, another creature to play. Good thing though for Martin, he's boarded in a bunch of 5-drops. So he's got a lot of live outs here. If he draws Virtuous Gearhook or Sky Sovereign, all of a sudden Martin's in the driver's seat. More so if he draws the Sky Sovereign for obvious reasons.
Yes. Although, do you drive boats?
I think you could say you drive a boat.
All right.
Martin still has Shock for this Veteran Motorist. He still has an unlicensed disintegration, the Heart of Kiran. So this game is still pretty close. It's just Martin is slightly down on spells. Yep. Both there's a Clue in play and there's Veteran Motorist lurking in hand plus Scry value. So I could see that. I could see Martin getting behind pretty quickly if he bricks here.
He found a Heart of Kiran.
All right, that's not nothing, and it also makes his unlicensed disintegration deal the 3 damage, which is nice. Note, Eduardo also did not attack with Heart of Kiran last turn.
He didn't attack with anything.
And the non-attack with Heart of Kiran made sense. He didn't want to crew it and walk into unlicensed disintegration. The Thraben Inspector, I think, could have gotten in there. There's not a compelling reason to keep that one back.
All right, Heart of Kiran now for Martin Juza. And he has left up an unlicensed disintegration mana once again, though it does seem to be clear that Eduardo has picked up on that and will do what he can do about it. Sky Whaler shot off the top for Eduardo, so he's now immediately found an answer to either threat on Martin's side of the board.
Yeah, part of the reason Eduardo has the edge here is that he just is up so many spells. Martin essentially has 1 spell. He's got just Game Trail and unlicensed disintegration in hand, so you're going to end up basically behind once Eduardo starts to deploy more of his cards. And even if Martin can take out Heart of Kiran here, he's going to need to draw 2 or 3 spells in a row to kind of keep up, especially since Eduardo's scrying more too. He's scrying off Skywaller's shot. He's going to scry off Veteran Motorist. Eduardo's not going to break his next couple of draw steps unless he gets very unlucky.
Cultivator's Caravan for Sajgalik. Now he's going to chip in there.
Yep.
Knock Martin down to 16. And pass the turn back. Martin's still not playing the card in his hand, and unfortunately for him, he just found another land off the top, Luis. Is this one starting to slip away?
It's getting a lot more difficult for Martin to win this game. Basically, every draw step for Martin is so critical now because he's just starved for spells, and Eduardo's just got a steady stream of them.
Sky Whaler shot.
For me, 16 for you, right?
Shoots down the Heart of Kiran. Shot to the heart. Let's see what Eduardo has for the follow-up.
Scry 2.
Well, he's got a Veteran Motorist. We knew that.
Yeah, and Martin is going to be able to disintegrate whichever vehicle gets crewed here, but actually it looks like potentially both are coming over thanks to that Scrap Heap Scrounger. But that still just leaves Martin with a Greenbelt Rampager facing down an entire army here.
This one is slipping away quickly from Martin Juza. Eduardo Sajgalik with a major advantage in this game. He's up 2-0, looking to advance past this quarterfinal stage 1. He has been firmly smashing every single game, and this one looks no different. Martin Juza light on resources with just a removal spell and a land left in his hand. How in the heck is he going to come back from this? His deck just isn't designed for that.
No, Martin's deck, very good at deploying threats efficiently and curving out. Less good at coming back, especially since it doesn't have really many avenues for card advantage.
And finally, that unlicensed disintegration comes out. Eduardo knew about that, but still, it's a significant amount of damage hitting Martin Juza, and this draw step is massive for him. He needs to find ways to get out of this mess.
If he finds a Sky Sovereign here, he could potentially be in it still. Sky Sovereign would come down, kill the Veteran Motorist, and he could leave it on defense thanks to Greenbelt Rampager, and it could block all of Eduardo's cards.
He found another copy of Unlicensed Disintegration. How does that work for him?
Well, it lets him kill the Heart of Kiran, which is presumably crewed by the Veteran Motorist. So he could lead back Greenbelt Rampager and block either the Scrap Heap Scrounger or the Third Inspector. So Unlicensed Disintegration gets Martin a little bit better, in better shape.
An Unlicensed Disintegration off the top, though, for Eduardo Sajgalik means that he is a massive favorite now, as there will be no blockers left over for Martin Juza. He's going to fall to 8 life here. Martin does get to kill the Heart of Kiran, but he's still taking 4. Half of his life total is going to fly away, and he may be down to just one more draw step for his top 8
I actually
run.
don't even know if he can draw anything that gets him out of this.
Yeah, he found a Heart of Kiran, and that does it. Eduardo Sajgalik from Team MTG Mint Card advances past quarterfinal stage 1, and you get the sense of it. He looked up at the sky like, oh, thank God, and he made it by. Martin Juza, a tough exit here in the opening round, but I have to say it was great to see Martin back in the top 8. It's been a while for him.
It certainly has, and watching Martin hit his 3rd top 8 was awesome.
Yeah, that was great run. But we've still got more quarterfinal stage 1 action for you. We've got Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa versus Jan Ksandr. You can see lots of magic being had out on our tournament floor as well. Now a lot of these are Pro Tour competitors that didn't make the top 8, and they're doing drafts, because what else would you do? Build, build, build. I like that deck. I saw a couple of Prophetic Prisms there. You can't go wrong with that. And back on the main stage, though, we've got serious business to take care of here. Once again, Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa versus Jan Ksandr. And this is very much the old guard versus the new. Again, this is only Jan Ksandr's 3rd Pro Tour. He's already found himself in the top 8, an impressive feat, to say the least. Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa, he's got almost triple the top 8s as Pro Tours played for Jan. So we have a little bit of a gap in experience here for sure. And Paulo finds himself up 2 games to 1. He won a blazing fast game 2, and then won the first post-sideboarded game as well. So
Paulo chose not to play a turn 1 3 Inspector because his only mana is 2 Aether Hubs, and he wants to use them to play a Veteran Motorist potentially to scry. Oh, he's only got the 1 Aether Hub actually. So, so we saw a game 2 where Jan didn't, or game 3 where Jan didn't play a land on turn 2, and looks like Paulo is following suit here.
Yeah, this one could get out of control quickly. Paulo has to feel like he got kind of a freebie there in game 2, and he may be giving it back to Jan Ksandr this game.
Not usually good news for a player when the advantage bar is maxed on turn 2.
That's right. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, we did introduce something new, an advantage bar. Sometimes if you're relatively new to watching high-level Magic play, you can be fooled. The life totals often don't indicate exactly who's ahead and behind in a game, so we've put that advantage bar in there to help translate what's really going on the board. Sure, life total is one of the metrics that you could use for that, but there's other things like cards in hand, what the board state is.
Not playing a land on turn 2.
Not playing a land on turn 2 is one way to lose a lot of advantage. So you can check that out in the middle of the screen. And if you're an experienced Magic vet, you already knew anyway.
Well, some games are also more difficult to discern than others. In this particular game, Paulo is in an unfortunate situation, but there are some games where a player could be at 2, but actually have an inevitability and have a huge advantage. So it is a useful shortcut.
Looks like Jan, after careful consideration, has decided, I don't really want any of these, and just put them all in the graveyard. He may be trying to kind of turbo out Delirium here and try to get this Grimflare maxed out. There was a land off the top, though, for Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa, so we do get to see some action, and this is one that can help him find a lot more mana. Looks like he's found a land, and now he's got to decide if he really wants to keep a Gideon. The obvious choice seems to be put it on the bottom, given that he is land short and has plenty of spells in hand, and that is what he ended up doing. Whining Constrictor for Jan Ksandr. First one of those we've seen today so far, but I'll tell you what, I've seen a lot of those on the battlefield throughout the course of this Pro Tour.
Yeah, and the veteran motorist is not going to do enough to stabilize here. Jan has a Grasp of Darkness if he wants to kill it. He can also play Mind Rack Demon, try to hit Delirium because he's got 3 of the 4 types so far, Instant, Land, and Planeswalker. And I think it's going to be pretty safe to say that Jan is significantly far ahead. Delirium easily achieved here.
That's 4 damage hitting Paulo. He's going to drop down to 14. He's going to have plenty to do for the rest of the game, even with just the 2 mana, but it just feels like it's going to be really difficult for him to make a full comeback. We'll see if he can do it, though.
Jan have the luxury of using his Grim Flare trigger, deciding what he wants to draw next turn, while he's like vastly ahead on board. Paulo just sitting there like, well, I can't concede. This is the top 8 of Approacher. I want to try to play this out, but I think there's a pretty good chance that Paulo draws his card and we go to next game. Well, he drew a land. That is.
Yeah, he put that there. He knew.
That's on the start of the comeback trail here.
Looks like he had eyes. He's still going to do it. He's just going to play a Cultivator's Caravan and pass. So now he has a blocker. It's big enough to block either of the 2 ground threats. It's hard to imagine that Cultivator's Caravan would actually be able to successfully block and survive, given that Jan Ksandr has been able to kind of craft his hand a little bit thanks to the Grim Flare, and on top of it, just hasn't had anything to point a removal spell at yet.
Jan also has a...
Oh, interesting. Transgress the Mind here.
Yeah, Transgress is an interesting card to bring in against a fairly low curve deck. Perhaps on the play, Jan likes it because he can, try to lead on turn 2 to take one of Paulo's 3 drops. But it does give Jan information. He knows now that Paulo doesn't have really anything that can interact. Those 2 Scrap Heap Scroungers are not what Paulo wants when he's so far behind.
Still, Paulo can't be sad to see Transgress there, right? He has all spells in hand anyway. Doesn't seem like he really minds. And here is Jan Ksandr not attacking with a snake.
No. Though, given that the Cultivator's Caravan was likely to get crewed, I think that the snake could have gotten in there. Grasp still leads to a very positive interaction for Jan. Makes the Caravan into a 2-2, thanks to Veteran Motorist. Which means Grimflare tramples over for 2 and Mind Rack hits for 4.
Yeah, so down to 8 goes Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa, and once again, the Grimflare sculpting the hand here for Jan Ksandr. This has been very powerful interaction as well, considering that he's got to hit multiple times with the Grimflare. That isn't something that you see very often. Usually they're hoping to hit just that one time after they get to untap with it, but here he's hit with it every turn and has really been able to dump some cards he doesn't want to see and, hopefully put some good ones on top of his library.
Not only is Jan ahead, not only is he getting damage through, he gets to choose the best of 3 cards to draw every single turn. Mm-hmm. And that just leads to such an overwhelming advantage that it's hard to imagine how Paulo gets back into this, especially without some kind of mass removal spell, which he does not have access to.
And Jan's going to pass the turn back to Paulo. Veteran Motorist to join another Veteran Motorist in his hand and the one on the battlefield. Normally you wouldn't mind being Veteran Motorist flooded, but he just doesn't have enough to do, and Paulo has seen enough. He's going to scoop up his permanents, and that means we're going to get a Game 5 here in quarterfinal stage 1 between these 2 players. 2 wins apiece. First player to get to 3 will advance. And Paulo's immediately going to consult that sideboard again, as is Jan Ksandr. They'll often change things based on whether they're on the play or draw.
Yeah, that is a critical difference depending on, whether something like Transgress, for example, on the play it is a lot more potent because you get to play it and sculpt your game plan and get to play it more often before your opponent has a chance to play anything out of it. But for the most part, I think that the players are going to adjust 1 or 2 cards based on player draw. Not usually the whole sideboard plan, but just small tweaks to it.
Curious about what you think Paulo's mentality will be here. Being top 8, number 11, still a special thing. But the shine has to wear off a little at some point where you're like, yeah, I'm here again, I've done this before. Do you shift your focus upwards in that scenario where you're really only thinking about trophies, or is it still like, no, it's a big landmark for me and I'm and I'm just happy to be in the top 8.
It's going to vary player to player, of course, but for the most part, I would say no matter who you are, no matter how many top 8s you have, maybe John Finkel just thinks of it as another day at the office, but honestly, making top 8 just feels incredible regardless of how many you have. And yes, you do shift your focus more towards winning because, a top 8 and then a quarterfinal exit is not as satisfying as it would have been if it was like your second top 8 versus, your 11th. But walking away with a trophy at the end of the day is still unparalleled.
Well, Paulo very well. You've been testing partner and friends with him for a really long time. How do you think? Is he all about that trophy? What's his mentality?
He's very happy to top 8.
Mm-hmm.
He does enjoy playing Magic. He does.
There's a Johnny, by the way, working on her sealed pool. I like that.
That's at Nissa Cosplay on Twitter if you want to follow her.
And she just held up a Nissa, by the way.
There we go.
Yeah.
But I know Paulo, if he doesn't win, he's going to be very disappointed. Not because he expects or deserves to win or thinks he deserves to win, but because he wants to win very badly. And making top 8 is a step towards winning. It's not the ultimate end goal. Since winning the Pro Tour is your goal, or at least is Paulo's goal. Players can set whatever benchmarks they so desire.
Mm-hmm. But you happen to know that Paulo's is the highest possible benchmark.
Yeah. And look, at the end of the weekend, he's going to be happy no matter what happens here because he made top 8, and that's a great finish. But in the moment, he will certainly be disappointed if he doesn't end up winning the tournament because that's the will to win. That's the fire, or I guess the ice in this case.
Yes, it is. It is interesting, though, when you contrast that. Jan Ksandr, I'm sure coming into this tournament that his expectation wasn't, well, I got to win. Win or go home, right? He's made the top 8 here in his 3rd Pro Tour, and, that has much bigger implications for him than it would for somebody like Paulo, who's already in the Hall of Fame, who's already at that highest level, and he's ranked 7th in the world right now. Jan Ksandr very much an upstart, and he's looking to solidify himself out on the Pro Tour scene, and, a top 8 finish like this means a ton of pro points, invites, that kind of stuff. It's going to be a big deal to Jan. Still, it always happens like this anyway, that once you sit down and start playing, it's just trying to beat you.
Yeah, you're just playing Magic, and I think that's the best attitude you can have in terms of how likely you are to win is while you're in the match, all the external stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, if you're playing to go, 9-7 at the Pro Tour or playing for top 8 at the Pro Tour. It doesn't matter if you're playing your game 5 of the quarterfinals or game 2 of the semifinals. Just try to maximize your chance to win the particular game you're playing. Don't really worry about your opponent unless it becomes relevant for some reason.
Did you see that from PV? He's shuffling. It looked like he wrote something out kind of with a fake pen and then nodded his head like, yeah, okay, it's right. I think he was trying to remember exactly what his sideboard plan was. Yeah. I bring in both of these on the play, right? He's like, yeah, you do. Okay. Been really impressed by Jan Ksandr. Again, with relatively little experience on the Pro Tour, he's been very composed. Especially facing down somebody of Paulo's caliber. I mean, when you make the top 8, there's this huge sense of elation, and then they're like, well, who am I playing tomorrow? And they're like, you're playing Paulo. It's like, well, great.
Yeah, you are playing the most experienced player in the top 8. And in a matchup which I would have to assume Jan is at least comfortable with, because it's hard to imagine any player here has a bad vehicles matchup, because how did you get to the top 8 if you had a bad vehicles matchup? Vehicles just all over day 2.
And the top 8. It's like one of Jan's sleeves had a little issue, so they swapped that out, but they're back underway.
Yeah, Paulo just had to get the sleeve there.
Okay, this is our decider here.
This is game 5. This is
it.
Most of the marbles, at least.
Yeah, this is for
the vast majority of the marbles.
Continuing to play for marbles, and this is going to have the aggressive player, Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa, with Mardu vehicles on the play in a post-sideboarded game. And he doesn't have the perfect start, but he does have a 1-drop with Raven Inspector. Evolving Wilds here for Jan. The Raven Inspector is going to hit the red zone. And this is where things start to get scary already for Jan Ksandr. There's a Heart of Kirin on turn 2. That's exactly what Paulo wants. If he can find a way to crew that, the damage starts piling up very quickly.
Well, Paulo has Pia Nalar in hand, so this is this is a Toolcraft exemplar short of almost the perfect start, but still a very, very good start.
Looks like Jan had another sleeve. He's got some flat tires here. But he's just going to swap that out.
So, Jan needs a good play this turn. It's going to be either Grimflare or Winding Constrictor, or based on the fact that he fetched a forest, he can no longer play Grasp.
I think he has access to either of them. He just drew a Winding Constrictor off the top of his library, but he also had the Grimflare in his hand, so he's going to decide to go with that. Ooh, Fatal Push off the top for Paulo. He can't quite do everything, though, can he?
No, but this just puts Paulo in incredible shape, because he can either play Cultivator's Caravan into Fatal Push the Grimflare, just attack for 1. He can play PNLR and attack for 4 in the air and have a Fatal Push next turn, depending on if he cares about getting hit by Grimflare.
How much does he care about it? I mean, the deck is called Black-Green Delirium, but, we don't have Emrakul anymore. We're not trying to build up to these huge Delirium numbers. I'm curious how much he actually prioritizes it. Yeah, it looks like he's going to take the aggressive line here, play Pia Nalar, which is going to allow him to crew up that Heart of Kiran and smash for 4 right now.
Yeah, Paulo is a huge favorite right now, because he had a 1-drop into a 2-drop into a 3-drop on the play with a Fatal Push, so next turn he can play 2 spells if he wants. And one reason not to play Cultivator's Caravan this turn is, yes, you get hit by the Grimflare, but like you said, Jan's deck isn't that Delirium focused. It's not like he has 7 Delirium cards in his deck. He just has Grimflares. And Paulo's not able to crew both Heart of Kiran and Cultivator's Caravan, so adding Caravan to the board doesn't actually give him that much extra power. Whereas adding Pia to the board lets him hit for 4 this turn, hit for 4 next turn with Heart of Kiran, 5 actually if you count the Thopter token, and then set up Fatal Push and or Unlicensed Disintegration. So Paulo's in really good shape here. It's also managed to line up such that Paulo has 2 removal spells in hand, and Jan has a hand without any Grasps of Darkness. He's going to be playing out creatures, and Paulo's just going to be like, kill your creature, attack you for a ton of damage. Kill your creature, attack you for a ton of damage. So I think Paulo is a very good chance of heading to the, I guess, second stage of the quarterfinals here.
If Paulo does win this game, he will face down Donald Smith from the United States in the quarterfinal stage 2. Liu Yu Chen awaits Eduardo Sajgalik on the other side of that quarterfinal. And then, of course, Marcio Carvalho and Lucas Esperartho are awaiting the winners of those matches as we work our way through the top 8. The structure's a little different. We've changed that somewhat recently. I'm sure we'll be talking about that throughout the course of the day, but hence the stage 1 quarterfinal. Jan Ksandr taking his time here on this decision. He can plainly see that he is under huge amount of pressure from the Hall of Famer and just doesn't have any wiggle room at all. A simple mistake at any point here will easily cost him the game, and there's a good chance that even if he doesn't make a mistake, he will lose this game. So he just does have no wiggle room whatsoever. Spire of Industry off the top for Paulo. He still has Cultivator's Caravan plus the 2 removal spells we described earlier in hand. Winding Constrictor there for Jan Ksandr is the only defense at the moment.
Spire of Industry also means that Paulo can just play 2 removal spells this turn if he wants. Getting to attack with Heart of Kiran. Like, let's say Paulo goes Fatal Push here, Winding Constrictor. Crew attack for 5. That drops Jan to 10. Then go Unlicensed Disintegration, your Grimflare, you drop to 7. And between PNLR and Heart of Kiran, it's not hard to imagine Paulo getting in for enough damage here. What Paulo has to respect here is
Fatal Push.
Fatal
right?
Push.
Yeah,
that's the card he's worried about.
Jan with that swamp just looming on his side of the battlefield. How much will Paulo Vitor respect that swamp? Remember, he is a little threat light in hand. He's got 2 removal spells and a Caravan. So he doesn't have a replacement Heart of Kiran. And look at this. Paulo just says, if you got it, you got it. Take 5.
And
Paulo's passing priority back, and Jan says, so I have to take 5? And Paulo's like, yeah, you take 5. That's going to drop him down to 10, and it's going to signal to Paulo that there is no fatal push on the other side, which is going to bring him tantalizingly close to advancing to quarterfinal stage 2.
And I think having the Cultivator's Caravan in hand gives Paulo a lot more incentive to just attack into fatal push, because even if Heart of Kiran gets pushed, you still have another vehicle to crew that you wouldn't have been able to crew anyway. You couldn't crew both at the same time, barring using PNLR to like pump the Thopter token or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. So Paulo thinks it's worth getting in there, and in fact, it worked out quite well for him.
Yeah, it certainly did. That was a hold your breath moment there for Paulo, as it would take a lot longer to finish this game if fatal push was in hand for Jan at that point, but the fact that it wasn't means that Paulo was tantalizingly close now. Is it going to be Mind Rack Demon for Jan? Yeah.
So, fatal push.
Seems like a fine target for an unlicensed disintegration.
Yeah, that leaves Paulo incredibly close to lethal. So
assuming that he fatal push, let's see what Jan does for attacks. Is he incentivized to attack here?
Yeah, he can get a Grimflare. He has to start worrying about PNLR's other abilities. She can pay 1 and sacrifice an artifact to make a creature unable to block. So Paulo can go Fatal Push, Unlicensed Disintegration, sack a clue so your last creature can't block. You're at 7, attack you with the Cultivator's Caravan and a Thopter. And I guess Paulo's 1 mana short of... Oh no, I guess he wouldn't. If he's sacking the artifact, he can't quite use Pia's ability to pump to finish things off. But either way, Jan ends up with such a bad board presence and such a big life total deficit that I don't think Jan's coming back, even if Paulo doesn't literally have lethal next turn.
Jan's working out right now if he can get away with an attack with the Grimflayer, and he says, yeah, I just got to take some extra risk on here. Paulo says, sure, hit me. Drops down to 14. Trigger, 2 lands and a Nissa.
So now Fatal Push plus Unlicensed Disintegration plus an attack. Paulo is 1 mana short of finishing the game with PNLR here.
So an untapped land would do it for him?
It would.
Let's see what happens. Once again, Jan taking his time, making sure that he makes these decisions correctly, but this one may be out of his hands as Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa is on the precipice of advancing past this quarterfinal stage 1 match against the young upstart from the Czech Republic. It's been a great match. This is game 5. We've had a couple of quick games in there, not a lot of Magic played. It's felt a little more like a best 2 out of 3, but
well, they each had a game where they missed their second land drop, so those cancel out, and we end up with the best 2 out of 3, which is part of the reason you play best 3 out of 5 in the top 8 of the Pro Tour.
Absolutely. That is one of the big reasons for it, because you come so far, and just to have a bad luck scenario knock you out of the tournament wouldn't feel great. It gives you a chance to come back from that. All right, here we go. Fatal Push on the Whining Constrictor. Untap. Does he find an untapped mana to finish the game this turn? Well, that is going to do it. Jan Ksandr extends the hand. He says, I don't have enough to fight you. The Hall of Famer, Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa, with a little bit of a smile there as he advances to quarterfinal, stage 2. So congratulations to Eduardo Sajgalik and Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa for both advancing and keeping their hopes of a trophy alive here. We've got a lot more Magic for you here on Pro Tour Sunday. This, of course, is the... this is where all the big stuff happens, right? You know, this is where we get in and we get the awesome, intense matches, and this is just the beginning. We've got quarterfinal stage 2 coming today. That leads us to our semifinals. Of course, we'll be playing 1 person versus 1 person in the finals to see who ends up winning that. Great stuff from the feature match area. Beyond that, we've got Donald Smith awaiting to play against Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa in the next quarterfinal, and we've got Liu Yu Chen. He's going to be playing against Eduardo Sajgalik from Canada, so we'll be introducing those as they come. All right, it sounds like we are all set to go. Let's head back up to set the stage for the quarterfinal stage 2 at the news desk.
Welcome back to the news desk. Quarterfinal stage 1 is done. Quarterfinal stage 2 will be along in just a minute. The noise behind me is basically almost everyone who played in the Pro Tour playing Magic. That's what Magic players like to do. Now, sure, they'd love to be in the feature match area playing in the top 8, but well, there wasn't quite room for everyone. But basically the whole field comes back on Sundays and just hangs out and has a good time playing Magic and watching the top 8. That means there are some very, very good Magic players who aren't in our feature match area but are here watching all the action. And 2 of those are downstairs right now with Tim Willoughby.
Thanks for that, Rich. I'm down in the area where the players get a chance to watch what's going on in the feature match area, and I've got 2 of Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa's teammates here, Mike Sigrist and Eric Froelich. They got a chance to see the conclusion of that match. Now, of course, PV has more Pro Tour top 8s than almost everyone. At this stage, do you guys have kind of a routine for what to do in the evening in terms of testing, practicing, getting enough sleep before a big Pro Tour match?
Yeah. Paulo doesn't really like to test before the top 8. He just likes to kind of relax and, go to bed. We go to a big dinner. Paulo pays for it. And yeah, that's about it. He doesn't like to go too deep the night before.
Makes sense, of course. I guess that there's been a fair amount of testing going on. Any particular players or details on decks that you think he's worried about in this top 8?
No, I mean, if anybody, it would have been Jan. But now that we're through that, it's all Mardu from here. So he's pretty comfortable there.
And of course, at this point, with Mardu in the top 8, this is a match you've tested a lot. With a player still in the running for winning this Pro Tour, this must be great news for Team Channel Fireball Ice. I mean, there's a lot of talent on this team, but there's a lot of points for a Pro Tour win.
Oh yeah, we are definitely counting the points from here on out. Like, we were 11th, I think, going into today, so every win is huge. Get us right up towards the top. I think if he wins, we will be tied for first.
A little bit of friendly rivalry with Channel Fireball Fire?
Absolutely.
Thanks for that. We will, of course, get a chance to see PV in future matches. We know that the Brazilian contingent, they've not all necessarily rolled in yet to watch matches, but they were super loud in congratulating all of the Portuguese speakers that made it into this top 8. And it's going to be exciting to see how the crowd builds as we get closer to a Pro Tour champion here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt.
Hello everyone, Rich Hagan here with Brian David Marshall and Luis Scott Vargas. So Luis, you were down there in the booth for the first set of quarterfinals. What was your sense of how the morning went so far?
Very quickly. Yeah. the vehicles decks are quite fast, and in fact, we saw Martin Juza fall to Eduard Sajgalik, and we saw Jan Ksandr fall to Paulo, Vitor, and Rosa. So it's vehicles all the way through at this point.
Right, well, why don't we take a look at our top 8 bracket here. Reminder that we're operating this new structure that we debuted at Pro Tour Kaladesh, 2 stages to the quarterfinals, which means that we're still quite away from Marcio Carvalho and Lucas Esperberto actually entering the fray. But we began Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa with his Mardu vehicles over Jan Ksandr with Black Green Delirium, and then in the bottom half of our bracket, Eduardo Sajgalik advancing past Martin Juza. So that sets up, now we're down to 6 players, and our stage 2 quarterfinals are on the way. So why don't we begin at the top half of the bracket. Here is Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa, representing the same squad as Eric Froelich and Mike Sigrist. They were down there in their ice shirts, Channel Fireball Ice, and of course the pro points that Paulo is racking up here in the top 8 go towards their team total. So right now, Channel Fireball Ice are in the top 10 teams, but as Paulo racks up the wins, they can be vaulting their way up, whereas most teams, of course, are already done. 366,000 lifetime earnings, and that is rapidly another 10,000 plus heading his way. Let's take a look at the first of many, many Mardu vehicles lists that are left in the tournament. Luis, what's going on?
So this deck is an aggressive deck that's trying to curve one drop, ideally Toolcraft Exemplar, into a Heart of Kiran or Veteran Motorist, and then use it to crew those vehicles, attack for a bunch of damage, and then use Unlicensed Disintegration and Shock to kind of clear the way.
Can you give us a sense, one thing I've been sort of seeing anecdotally, Scrap Heap Scrounger, there are lots of aggressive cards that have that clause of can't block. And it seems like that does make it very hard for them to come back once they're on defense. We've seen a lot of games where they've got 3 creatures, but 2 of them can't block. So if they're ever forced onto the defense, they're in big trouble.
Yeah, the vehicles decks, vehicles also don't lend themselves all that well to blocking because they require something to crew. Of course, the combo of Scrap Heap Scrounger plus a vehicle kind of makes it so Scrounger can block, but in general, the vehicles decks play well from ahead and tend to want to be pressing the advantage.
So Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa, with his 11 Pro Tour top 8s, is in business. He's through to quarterfinal stage 2. Enter one of our new players, one of our 3 and 4 seeds, and this is Donald Smith. Now he's just 21. Look at that though. 4 and 2 in draft. That is 0 losses in standard. Fantastic. Lingering Souls, you would have called them a mid-level team coming in, but he, again, racking up the pro points for that team. They could yet end up on top of the team pile by the end of this first of 3 Pro Tours here. As I say, he's just 21, his first Pro Tour top 8. He's a silver pro, but that meant his 1 invite coming here soon took care of business. He'll be on the Pro Tour for the rest of the season for sure. So congratulations to him. Here's his list. And once again, it's Mardu Vehicles BDM.
Yeah, we see a couple of different cards in the list. Donald Smith's playing Bomat Courier as another 1-drop. Luis gets him even a little more aggressive. He's got, like, what is that, 10 1-drops there, the 4 Scrap Heap Scroungers. I know that a card that's in his sideboard, which isn't on screen, that has his Paulo's teammates a little concerned about the matchup is actually Gisela the Broken Blade. Just a card that none of the other Mardu decks have access to, I believe, main or side. Certainly, I'm just going on their account. I'd have to look through all the lists, but I know that Paulo's teammates are concerned about that card in this matchup for the games that happen post-sideboard. What do you think that card could be pretty relevant here?
It definitely is, and in fact, it was causing I saw them play testing a little bit and sideboard differently because they have to respect Gisela.
I was interested to hear Mike Sigris say in the interview with Tim Willoughby down on the floor that Paulo's someone who doesn't like to test the night before. Now, I can't ever imagine just handing off those duties to someone else, but I suppose when the room is Hall of Famer Platinum, Hall of Famer Platinum, Platinum teammate, it's kind of okay to put your feet up.
I will say, having some experience in this situation myself, you make top 8, you go to dinner, you pay for dinner because that's the tradition. If you make top 8, you buy your team dinner. I would always just watch like 3 games and go to bed, and then in the morning they just tell me what the results of their play testing were. And I do this for 2 reasons. I think Paulo's similar. One is you trust your teammates. That's the most important. You know that Mike Sigris and Eric Froelich are going to play test and come up with a good plan. Josh Utterlane and Matt Nass are going to play all night. The other is that Paulo trusts his own judgment. I trust my own judgment. You can look and you're very prepared. You are not often going to play against a deck in the top 8 you've never seen before, so you can bank on some of the previous games that you've play tested and get a little bit more sleep. Sleep is very useful.
How much of that play testing is actually having someone in the opposite seat and trying to figure out what your opponent's going to do? Like it's almost like your practice. You know what you're going to do in every given situation, but like you're looking for that intel report about what's going to happen in the opposite seat post sideboard.
It's very important. You want to know, they could sideboard this way or this way or this way. How would I sideboard for each of these plans? Because you don't actually know what your opponent's going to do because you're not going to ask them. You can't be like, hey, how are you planning to sideboard tomorrow? But depending on what you think they're going to do, that does affect your plans.
Okay, so we have Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa up against Donald Smith. Now, anyone against Paulo is basically an underdog, but the decks don't have a lot to put between them. I love Bomat Courier as a card. I'd love to see that do well. But what about our other last remaining quarterfinal here in stage 2? Well, enter our last new player here. You see, there's the bracket. We're going to see Marcio Carvalho and Lucas Esperberto after lunch. But in the bottom half, it's the 3 seed from China, Liu Luchen, up against Eduardo Sajgalik, who beat Martin Juza in the last round. So the 35-year-old from China here is with a very impressive 69 lifetime pro points. It doesn't sound like a huge number, but remember, you're not exactly blessed with many, many local GPs to get to. 1 or 2 a year in China, probably. And so to get to that number of pro points, very impressive. Clearly one of China's finest players, 5 Grand Prix top 8s, pretty much has an amazing conversion rate in terms of the number of GPs played. 5-1 in draft, 7-1, and then 2 draws, happily to take the draws at the end.
I don't know about happily. When he took that last draw, he thought he was going to be the first or second seed and was very disappointed to find that he had fallen into the 3rd seed and forced himself to play another match today. That definitely hindsight's 2020, but was very unhappy with that last draw in the end.
Wow, so maybe that 3rd match that he's going to have to play could ultimately cost him. We'll see. Here is his deck. It is, let's see if I can remember. Oh, that's right. It's Mardu vehicles. Luis, anything different here?
He's got a couple copies of Aether Sphere Harvester, the 3/5 lifelinker for 3, which does give him a pretty good edge in aggressive mirrors. He's also got the full 4 shocks, so he can curve out a little bit faster in a lot of these matchups.
You said that ideally Toolcraft Exemplar is the one drop you want over Thraben Inspector, and I guess that's why Donald Smith is running Bomat Courier, because he wants another better option at 1. How important, because you said that the decks are very fast, how important is turn 1?
These games, from what we've seen all weekend, if you don't have a play on turn 1, you are actually behind. The format is at a point where you want to go 1 into 2 into 1 plus 2. Those are the magic numbers.
Okay, 1, 2, 1 plus 2. I think I can remember that. Oh, right. So that is Liu Yuchen of China. He needs an opponent. He has one, and a terrific one at that. It's Eduardo Sajgalik. Here he is, MTG Mint card, who, in a way, Eduardo looked like the unusual choice on MTG Mint card. Mostly Asia Pacific All-Stars, Li Shichan, Huang Hao Shan, Kelvin Chu on that squad, and thought, fair play, Eduardo, you've got yourself on a fantastic team there, and he has really repaid their faith in him by making his 2nd Pro Tour top 8.
And that first Pro Tour top 8 was the same first Pro Tour top 8 for Li Shitian. Is that how they...
Return to Ravnica?
Pro Tour Return to Ravnica? Is that where they sort of forged that bond?
I don't know. I mean, as I say, initially when I saw the team list, I thought, that's a surprise. But fantastic to see him there, closing in on 150 lifetime pro points. And again, the points that they rack up here on the final day will go towards MTG Mint card, who are already doing very nicely, thank you. Worth bearing in mind that both Dex Army and Dex 3rd, well, they've still yet to enter the competition. Our top 2 seeds come from the same test pool, which is an amazing result. So there's Eduardo Sajgalik. Let's look at his deck. There it is, Mardu vehicles. So this time, and again, Luis, we're looking at that 1 drop this time. Instead of the regular package of 8, this time it's 1 little lonely Inventor's Apprentice.
Yeah, Inventor's Apprentice sneaking as the 9th 1 drop, though. Another critical feature in terms of 1-mana spells, Eduardo's got 4 Fatal Pushes. That's part of the reason he was able to defeat Martin Juza. Fatal Push, matching up very well against cards like Greenbelt Rampager and Longtusk Cub, and even in the mirror, killing Heart of Kiran is critical.
Right, Martin thought he was favored against a lot of the other Mardu vehicles decks, but not Eduardo's.
Yep.
All right, so we're gearing up for part 2 of our quarterfinals. You'll see Liu Yuchen against Eduardo Sajgalik, and the 11-time Pro Tour top 8 man from Brazil, Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa, against the Lingering Souls team member, Donald Smith. It's time for part 2 of our quarterfinals.